So let's move on to today's talk. So for many, David Attenborough's Dynasties really marked something new in natural history filmmaking. It gave us a real in-depth examination of a particular group of animals, and sometimes really focused on key individuals within those animal groups. Now, as you'll know, our speaker Will Lawson directed the Emperors episode, which brought nature's instinct for survival into sharp focus. The film also made the headlines for the crew's unusual decision to intervene with its subjects when they stepped in to actually save some of the trapped birds. Will's worked on many other programs for the BBC and for National Geographic, and he's also worked as a game ranger in Southern Africa for 7 years, a wonderful period in his life, I'm sure. Throughout the making of Blue Planet 2, I was privileged to witness the remarkable creativity, monumental problem solving, and exceptional teamwork that really go together to make these series possible. And through that engagement that I was able to have, as well as many other links between our research community and the BBC Natural History Unit, the University of Exeter is honoured to forge ever stronger links between science and the media. So it's time to say hello to Will. Hi, Will. Can you hear me?
I can, Steve.
Hi. So, Will, how's life in lockdown treating you?
It's, I think, like everybody, it's become slightly tedious. I'm hoping that the talk this evening will give everybody probably a much needed bit of escapism from their front room and take them to a very special part of the world that obviously holds a very special place in my life experience to date.
While we wait, I've got one other question I want to ask you, Will. Have you had any exciting natural wildlife encounters during lockdown?
Ooh, well, I guess we're lucky. Actually, I'll tell you one thing that I did experience for the first time down in Devon recently was went for a run. We were down there for a bit of time off last week, went for a run along the coast and saw a silver pheasant, which I've never seen before. I think it's actually an introduced species, but they do breed in the UK now. And it was the first time in my life I'd seen one of those. So not that death-defying or in the ends of the earth anywhere, but it was something that was quite unique and special. So nice. Yeah, okay, I think I can share this now. So let me see if this works.
Well, thank you.
So hopefully everybody can see a very cute picture.
We can.
Of an emperor penguin. I just wanted to remind everybody what I was going to be talking about today, and I think there's no better way of doing it than with essentially the star of the show for Dynasty's Emperor Penguin episode, which was these incredibly adorable, cute, charismatic birds. Obviously this is a chick, Emperor Penguin chick, and it hadn't been around for very long, and as you can see it's still trying to get used to living on ice. And for me personally, that was a key part of being down there, actually learning to live on ice in the first place. Dynasties, as hopefully most of you will recall, was a 5-part series, and as you can see from our poster there, Emperors was one of 5 very charismatic animals from across the globe that we focused on. And it was unusual in terms of a filming endeavour, because usually for a landmark series with the BBC, you have 3 to 4 years to make the programme, and within that period of time you go backwards and forwards to the locations where the filming occurs, and you take stock, you look at what you've got, and you reevaluate. For the Emperor Penguin episode, it was an all or nothing scenario. We had one attempt, one shoot, if you like, and myself and 2 others went down to Antarctica to live on a German research station for just under 11 months, and hopefully were to come back with all the ingredients necessary to make a fantastic programme that was worthy of Sir David Attenborough narrating. Antarctica is an incredible location, and for most people, I think it is a mysterious place, a place where few of us actually get the opportunity to go to. it's probably similar to places like Patagonia, Siberia, Tibet. They're all raw, unadulterated natural locations around the world, and they have absolutely no lack of potential adventure. And I still keep in touch with the team that we went with, and I'm still in touch now actually with the current overwintering team that's down in Antarctica. And I think Antarctica is the safest place to be in the world right now. I think it's the only place in the world that any continent that has no cases of COVID-19, touch wood, hope it stays that way. And actually this photo that you see here was sent to me yesterday by Klaus Goethe, who's the station leader down at Neumayer Station. And today is the 23rd of July. Yesterday was actually the first time that they saw the sunrise there for 2 months. It was the end of polar night. And so I'm actually really starting in the middle of my experience by giving you a little bit of relevance to the date today. And I actually sent him back this photo, which is the photo that I took on the 22nd of July when I was there in 2017. And for those of you who don't know what polar night is, it's the period of time in Antarctica or a pole, it can happen in the Arctic as well, where you don't see the sun rise above the horizon. That probably seems very daunting, but oddly, it was one of the things that I was most excited about experiencing during my year down there. And the only way that you can experience polar night in Antarctica is to make the commitment to be down there over the winter. And what that means is that around February, March, you wave goodbye to the last plane as it departs, in the knowledge that the next available opportunity to have a plane come in and take anybody off the base wouldn't be for another 8 months. So it's a big commitment. It's a life commitment rather than just a job commitment. But yeah, a very, very special time. And so it was lovely to have those memories flood back of the first time that I saw the sun come above the horizon in 2 months when I was down there. But that's a very important time for the emperor penguins too. During the last 2 months, the males have been left on their own. The females depart, they go to sea, they fatten themselves up for a very important role, which is to come back just at the right time, which will actually happen in about a week at the beginning of August, when the males have gone through the winter with nothing but one another for support to brave some of the most brutal weather and storms on the planet, and hopefully retain that single egg that they keep on their feet all the way through until the sun comes back above the horizon, as it has done in the last couple of days. And then hopefully the females see that as a sign to come back to the colony when the eggs have just hatched and take over the responsibility of feeding that newborn chick. And the males, having fasted or nearly starved actually for the last 4 months, then go off to sea to have a much needed reprieve. But there's one person that can probably explain it a little bit more succinctly than I can. So I think I'll just ask if Sir David Attenborough can give a bit of a download.
The Emperor Penguin program is slightly different from all the rest because it's not about one particular Emperor Penguin or family, and indeed you couldn't tell because all Emperor Penguins look exactly the same. The only way they can survive in the Antarctic, the heart of the Antarctic, is if the males endure the winter with their eggs sitting on their feet throughout the hideous blizzards. They sit there in a huddle, and the blizzard comes in, and after a bit, the men and the males in the front just have had it. They can't survive any longer, and they think, blow this for a game of marbles, and they walk around and they come round the back. But this is filmed in such detail and with such skill and in such circumstances that, well, you may think you've seen Emperor Penguins, but until you've seen this program, you really haven't. Moving together in synchrony is the key to creating a powerful bond.
It just gives me goosebumps actually watching that. It's yeah, what an amazing time it was down there. But I didn't go on my own. This photo was taken in April 2016. I'd actually said yes to going down to Antarctica in Christmas or early January in 2015. So it was a long time in the making. It was a big personal commitment, and going with the right people is, without a shadow of a doubt, one of the most important parts of it. It was myself on the left that you can see there, Lindsay McRae, the esteemed cameraman, in the middle, and Stefan Kreisman, the camera assistant, on the right-hand side there. And this was when we met down at the BBC in London for the very first time as a team. And little did we know, in just over a year, this would be us. And this is actually at Midwinter's Day, the 21st of June, halfway through polar night. Don't let the ambient light there fool you. The sun definitely wasn't above the horizon. And we were essentially at that point at the midpoint of our adventure, filming the penguins down there. So it was a very special point in the proceedings. The way it all began was the esteemed producer, Miles Barton, who's been working at the BBC for a long time, got in touch with me and asked if I was interested on going on this adventure down to Antarctica for Dynasties. And I remember very vividly him saying to me, "Will, please don't say yes to me straight away. Go away, think about it, take stock, actually think of the logistics, the practicalities of going away, leaving friends and family for a year, and putting yourself in some quite hostile situations." And he said, go and speak to people who have done it. And I think at that time there was maybe 4 or 5 people that had ever spent a whole year filming Emperor Penguin, so that the pool of people to get advice from was quite shallow. And obviously, a few weeks later, I came back and I said I still wanted to do it. And then Lindsay came onto the team, and Stefan, who had actually overwintered down at Neumeier Station before, also came onto the team. And we were going to be the core unit that went down there to film Dynasties. But we were actually going to be part of a 12-person overwintering team at Neumeier Station. Everybody else that you can see in that photo was going to be there whether we went or not. So it was a huge privilege to be able to join this 9-person overwintering team and essentially be a unique added element to the winter. What was amazing, and I think having spent a lot of time working in Africa in isolated places with small teams, it's universal and beyond doubt that the people that you go on these adventures with are what make or break it. And as you can imagine, on an experience like this, your colleagues stop being colleagues and even stop being friends, and actually they become family. And so that group of 12 people that you can see on the screen there became a family by the time I came back. And even thinking about it now, it's incredibly emotive, because it makes me remember how incredibly close and tight-knit we were by the time we came back. And I can safely say, if I wasn't working at the BBC, I wouldn't have got this opportunity, and that is one of the many reasons that working for the BBC NHU is a fantastic thing to be able to do. So where did we go? So that's Neumeier Station. Neumeier Station 3, there was 2 previous stations before we went there, in that part of Antarctica. This is a German map, which is very apt because we were the German station, but we came from South Africa. We flew from Cape Town. We went to a Russian base en route. It actually takes 7 hours to fly from Cape Town to the Russian base. And then you change to a smaller plane and you hop across to Neumeier, which is a further 2.5 hours. So that Southern Ocean is much bigger than we realise. So we really were a long way from home. This is Neumeier. It's an incredible station. I don't think we could have hoped to be at a more comfortable place to live for the better part of a year. And just to give you a little bit of an insight what it looks like inside, part of it is actually below the surface of the ice. You can see this section here. This is where they kept the piston bodies, the skidoos, the machinery, everything like that. And then the main living quarters is actually on stilts, so that the wind and the snow can actually pass through and not accumulate on the windward side of the station itself. An amazing place. This is what it looked like inside, just to give you a bit of an idea. The living quarters in the top left, dining room top right, my bedroom bottom left, and the all very important gymnasium on the bottom right there. And all of these are just converted shipping containers that have been repurposed to live in. This is a little clip that I thought I'd put in here. One of the things that was very clear was that you were going to have to, 1, keep active down there, 2, have a project, and for me personally, I decided as a keen runner that by the time I came back, I wanted to have at least attempted to run a marathon down in Antarctica, so that I had a completely separate project to work, so that there was a little bit of balance in my life down here. But I quickly realized down there that you go from exercising to being very sedentary, and then exercising again and being very sedentary. And I realized that I would have to do a little bit of light exercise as well as more serious exercise.
Morning, lads. One of my daily routines. Get up and go for a little walk in these beautiful surroundings. Got all these fantastic photos of green and pleasant places around the world, just to remind me of what countryside with a bit of life in it looks like. But basically, because I don't really get much exercise here unless I go on the running machine or manage to get running outside, about 2 months ago I decided that I would do a walk every morning when I woke up, just to kickstart my day, get the blood moving, metabolism kick-started, and yeah, that's one of my daily activities. Fun, isn't it?
So we had to keep moving. I essentially had to learn physiotherapy down there as well, because when I was exercising, I was tearing muscles and all sorts. So that was a little bit of an insight inside the station. Obviously, quite quickly, we had to get used to the elements living outside of the station, the most important part of being down in Antarctica, arguably. And this little clip I put in here because it's a stark contrast from what you just saw. And this is a little bit of my initial reaction to the weather down in Antarctica.
Just come up onto the roof really quickly. We haven't been outside for a couple of days because the storm's been so bad. But the sky's cleared even though it's still windy, and I just came up to see what it was looking like. Still looking pretty diabolical, but it was just a stark reminder of what this place is all about. It's really easy to feel quite comfortable inside, and I can hardly feel my fingers right now. I'm just not dressed for it to be out here. But it's just so brutal out here when you look towards the horizon, even though there's a bit of pink on the horizon where it's looking nice. It just is, my fingers are just finished. But this place is wild, really wild. And it's worth reminding ourselves that every now and again.
Obviously it was a cold place. This is Lindsay, who was my model for the day. And this gives you a bit of an insight into what we actually had to wear every single time we went outside to do anything, not just filming, but to explore the landscape, to get around. And it would take us probably about 20 minutes just to get dressed. And then we had to get our kit ready, then we had to get our skidoos ready, and 40 minutes would pass from deciding to finally leave to actually leaving. And that was something that we had to get used to. It became part and parcel of our routine. And yeah, another very stark difference from walking out of your front door back here in the UK. It wasn't quite the same down there. This photo is us waving goodbye to the plane for the last time, and knowing that we were told that there was a less than 5% chance that even if we had a life-threatening illness that we would be able to leave the continent, which is obviously quite sobering when you actually think about it. It was an exciting moment though, because really, even though we'd been in Antarctica for over 2 months by that point, that our adventure was really beginning. Penguins had left, they left in early January, and so we were really waiting for the next wave of penguins to return to start their 2017 breeding season. So in that period of time, whilst we were waiting, we went to explore. We realised that we were a very long way from home. That's a sign that I made whilst we were down there, just to remind us how far the BBC in Bristol was. And it wasn't long, literally a week after the plane left, we went for a skidoo ride and came across this almighty crack in the ice shelf. And why that is important is because our station was positioned on the ice shelf, which is ice that's come off the continent over the ocean and is essentially sort of floating over the ocean itself. At the edge of the ice shelf is where you meet the sea ice, and that's where the emperor penguins actually breed. We thought the ice shelf was safe as houses. Nothing was going to go wrong. We found this crack and we looked down it and we realized that it wasn't quite as safe as we initially thought. And it was a big eye-opener, a reality check, that this landscape was dynamic, shifting, always changing, and we really would have to be on our toes. We had a very strong inclination that this piece of ice that had the crack through it, which was almost a kilometre long, was actually going to break off. And we had been spending time filming on the opposite side at the edge of the ice shelf. Anyway, about 10 days after we took these photos, we came back and that had happened. What you can see in the distance up here is the ice shelf, which is now an iceberg sitting in the sea. This is actually how icebergs form. Down here, I don't know if you can see that, that's actually Lindsay and Stefan standing there at the edge of the ice shelf, showing the scale of how much of this ice broke off whilst we were there. This happened 2 further times before the temperature started to drop enough for everything to start solidifying and not changing anymore, basically. So it was, yeah, it was an eye-opener. It was an interesting point in our time down there. And if I'm not playing it down by saying it was quite scary. So we realized that the ice was really going to be the only way that we could measure this change in the season, the change in time that we were down there. The sun by this point was setting again. When we first arrived, it was 24-hour daylight, but this time it was setting. But we didn't have flowers coming into bloom or fading. We didn't have trees with their leaves changing color or anything like that. We had nothing that you would relate to back home as giving you an idea of what the changing seasons were. The only thing that we had was the presence or absence of ice. This photo that you see here was taken in February. This photo was taken about 5 weeks later at the beginning of March. And that is open water that is now completely frozen and is solid sea ice. So we realized that this environment and the ice in it could change really quickly. At that point, we just had to wait. The penguins that you saw there actually arrived a little bit later than the order that I put it in, but we had to wait. We had to wait for the penguins to come back, and we knew that we were going to be waiting for the better part of 2 months. So that was a long period of time to get to know the place that we were going to be working in, and every now and again we got some phenomenally exciting wildlife encounters even before the penguins had arrived. Hopefully this one will play next.
Yeah.
Are you kidding?
No. Hey, just here in this bit of water.
Yeah,
See
well
them?
done. We've been surprised by a whole pod of killer whales that are finding any little gap on the sea ice below us to spy hop all over the place. It's absolutely magical.
Amazing. That was what I'd consider a proper Antarctic scene. I didn't expect to see any orcas in this part of the Antarctic, especially where we are now. I mean, there's an enormous amount of sea ice between us and proper open water.
Very humbling experience. Actually, weirdly, it's quite emotional to see them in this sort of landscape. If I don't have another orca sighting in my whole life, that's not necessarily the worst thing in the world, having just experienced that.
Now, having had a few years since that point in time, I can still unequivocally say that that is the most phenomenal killer whale or orca sighting that I've ever seen in my life. And to see them in that landscape, where it couldn't be more wild, it couldn't be more their domain, but to see them spy hopping around like that, and actually they were actually looking for a Weddell seal that was on some of the ice floes there, was just remarkable. But that's not what we were there to film. Eventually, towards the end of March, we actually saw these guys arriving, bearing in mind that we hadn't seen a penguin for the better part of 2 months. And then suddenly on the horizon, we started seeing these quite humanoid black shapes that were shivering in the heat haze. And you actually do get heat haze down there, quite ironically. And eventually, line upon line upon line of these penguins started to come seemingly out of nowhere. As you can imagine, for us, this was incredibly exciting, but also incredibly frustrating, because you might be able to see up in the top right corner of that photo, that's all the penguins, about half a kilometre away from the edge of the ice shelf. And between us and them was freshly forming sea ice that we were very, very unsure of in terms of its quality and the ability for us to safely move over it. So we then had to spend a period of time getting down onto the sea ice, trying to get shots of them from the safety of the edge of the ice shelf, until we felt certain enough that we could start slowly but surely moving towards them. And it's not a particularly good photo in terms of quality, but we used this almost comedy-sized drill to test the thickness of the ice every sort of 15 to 20 meters as we made our way to the colony. It was very painstaking, grabbing shots as we went, attached to one another the whole way, so that if anybody did fall in, we could quickly haul them out and get them back to a warm environment. But eventually, we got there. And this was taken in mid-April 2017, when we finally got to the colony. And it was a cacophony of sound. We'd spent most of our time on the ice shelf with nothing else living around us. And one of the amazing things about Antarctica is that that means that it's completely and utterly silent. If there's no breeze or no wind, there's no sound at all. And that was a really special part of being down there, actually. And some of us might have had some experiences of that during lockdown, where everything's just been unusually quiet. And those are very special moments. But when we got to the colony, we later found out there was just over 10,000 birds here. When we got to the colony, that sound never, ever ceased. And that was that was something that we had to get used to. But it was amazing. We started to film the behaviors that we wanted to. The penguins were as interested in us as we were in them, and we started really making a lot of progress. But as we were making progress, temperatures were dropping at the same time. That's Lindsay with quite a remarkable snotsicle. That was one of his personal bests, so we had to get a photo of that. And we had to actually position these containers between the colony and the station itself. The station was about 10 kilometers away, so that we could retreat regularly back to the containers, warm up, as you can see on the inside there, sleep in it if necessary, and then get back out and film again. So it really started to be quite the process of going out, nearly freezing to death, going back to the containers, warming up, going back out, nearly filming to death, and then starting again the following day. Inevitably, this is actually my hand, we did get some injuries, and that was a steep learning curve of how to adapt to the cold. This is the effects of frostbite, and I got it on my index finger, or my middle finger there, and index finger, and it was very uncomfortable. And it's also completely debilitating in terms of going back out. When I got frostbite, I couldn't really go back into the cold for nearly 2 weeks because it essentially aggravates the injury, and it's very, very painful. So that was a steep learning curve, knowing how to recognize when it was getting too cold and to call it a day, and how to actually wear your kit effectively was another learning curve for all of us. The camera equipment took a beating as well. Incredibly, though, nothing broke whilst we were down there. All of the kit that we took down came back in working order. And I think one of the main reasons for that is that the moisture in the atmosphere is so incredibly low. Antarctica is considered a desert because it has such low levels of moisture, that it's moisture and electronics which are enemies. The cold and electronics don't get on very well, but at least the cameras could recover when we gave them the opportunity to. Soon, it didn't take long for the sun to be replaced by the moon. Believe it or not, this is a picture of the moon with a beautiful halo around it over the station. And as I talked about before, polar night began before we knew it was even happening. 21st of May is when it happened. And then we knew from that point onwards, one, we were going to get much colder. Two, our filming window with the penguins was going to get much shorter. And it was going to be a very unusual time, that's for sure. This is a photo of the beginning of polar night taken as I'm lying down watching the birds whilst Lindsay was trying to grab some shots. And it suddenly became the case that quite a lot of our time was actually going to be spent in the station rather than with the birds. This was taken on midwinter's evening, the 21st of June, and we decided to make, this is our family, we decided to make midwinter's day Christmas Day. We arrived just before Christmas Day in 2016, but it was 24-hour daylight. It was actually unusually warm. There was about 50 people at the station. It didn't feel like Christmas at all. So by this point, it was cold, it was dark, it was snowy. We were a family, and it was inherently festive. So we put Christmas decorations up. Ben, who's the chef that you can see in the closest foreground of the picture, put together this fantastic Christmas meal for us. And yeah, it was incredibly festive and a fantastic break from the monotony of polar night. Let's see if this is supposed to play. When Polar Night began, one of the things that we knew we wanted to film, which hadn't been filmed in detail before, which is coming to the end of its natural phase now at the end of July, is the males being left alone, facing the winter storms, huddling together, and we wanted to see and experience firsthand what went into that incredible adaptation that they've got. And for us, it was going to be our biggest challenge. And this is a little clip showing us getting out there and trying to film that behavior.
Back in Antarctica, the team are preparing for their greatest challenge yet, the winter storms.
It's cold and really windy, and it's meant to deteriorate throughout the day. So it's going to give us a decent opportunity to witness how the birds cope in such horrific conditions.
With winds up to 75 kilometers per hour, it's a battle for the crew to even make it to the colony.
The guys are just getting set up behind me to try and get in position, and we've laid out the skidoos in a long line so that if we lose sight of them, that we can just head back towards the wall of skidoos.
It's extremely cold though, so I'm not sure how long our kit's going to survive. We've got proper weather now, and really strong wind. The colony's just in front of us. Sometimes it disappears behind the snow. It's just incredible to see the penguins trying to survive in these conditions.
Cold and exhausted, the crew head for shelter at the base.
There's very few words I can describe or use to describe our first-hand experience of being down there with the birds when a storm was just beginning. And bearing in mind that storm was just starting, we gave ourselves a cut-off point of, I think it was 35 knots, which I believe is about 55 or 60 kilometre an hour winds, or maybe closer to 50 kilometre an hour winds, before we were going to decide that that was it for us. We were going to get back. And actually, to be honest, we stuck to our guns. We had every safety measure in place that we could: GPSs, radios, emergency containers that had tents and this, that, and the other. The containers close by to retreat to if we couldn't get all the way back to the base. We had to have all of these things on standby for us just to be able to go out at the beginning of the storm. We got back after a close call, I think, any longer, and I think we would have been in dire straits at one point. But we got back, we were safe, we were cold, but we started to warm up. But we knew that the birds, especially the males, were going to be left in those conditions. And it was our first insight into how incredibly well adapted these birds are to arguably one of the most hostile environments on the planet. It was incredibly humbling. My respect for these animals went through the roof, and overnight they became my favorite animal on the planet. And unfortunately, it was a prelude for something that was going to be heartbreaking for us. Some males didn't make it in that storm, and their eggs also didn't make it. They were blown off their feet, and as soon as they were off their feet, they froze almost immediately. But many of them did, which was a big relief. And the females returned at the beginning of August to find the majority of the chicks had hatched successfully. The males had given their last portion of fat reserves or body food reserves to the chick, and then passed them over to their partners and departed. What we didn't realize was that the advent of the sun returning would mean that some of the most hostile weather conditions were about to kick off. And wave after wave of storms were going to batter this colony relentlessly. And it didn't take into consideration, it didn't care that some of these chicks were literally days old, and they were going to have a baptism, well, not a baptism of fire, a baptism of ice rain down upon them. And the result was going to be really shocking. And I remember we'd filmed the chicks having hatched and the partnership exchange between the male and female, and our hearts went out to the tenacity of the males making it through the winter and the females making it through the winter and coming back on time, and just everything working like clockwork. And then we knew that with the weather forecast, a bad storm was going to hit. We had no idea what impact that was going to have, but we knew it wasn't going to be good. The storm hits and we were inside the base for, I think, 5 days before we could get out. When we headed back down to the colony, before we even got there, we could see in the distance that it was chaos. There was chicks wandering around without their mother. There was mothers wandering around without their chicks. The colony had been split up, and some of the colony were actually up on the ice shelf, not just down on the sea ice anymore, because a ramp of snow had developed between the two. And when we stopped and looked, we could see little bumps in the snow in front of us. And when we got to those bumps, we actually realized that each one of them represented a chick that hadn't made it, that had come disorientated, fallen off its mother's feet, and perished. And as we looked around, we saw more of these snowy bumps, and we realized that the colony had taken a real battering. It had been bruised in a massive way. And we could hear this noise at the edge of the ice shelf. And when we walked there, I remember Lindsay and Stefan were in front of me, and they just exclaimed, they gasped, they were like, oh my goodness. And we got to the edge and we looked down, and there was this enormous gully that was between the edge of the sea ice and the ice shelf. And in it was a whole group of females with chicks on their feet. And we watched them, and they were trying to get out of the gully, but they just couldn't. They couldn't get up the slope. And as we looked, we could see that there were these little snowy mounds down in the gully already, where we hypothesized females had abandoned their chick to save themselves. And this was unique. It was unique to the colony. It was unique to this particular breeding season. So we decided to document it, and we filmed it. And we saw some success. We saw one female heroically managed to make her way out, still with the chick on her feet. And we hoped and we waited that the rest of the mothers would follow suit, but none of them did. And we filmed for the rest of the day, and the wind started to pick up, and we knew another storm was approaching. So we had to depart. We went back to the base, and obviously we talked to each other. We talked to the rest of the team that were there. We told them what had happened and what we'd seen. And we were like, gosh, what on earth do you do in this situation? What can you do in a natural situation like this? And we thought, gosh, the situation is so unusual. You've got the weather that's causing this almost like kill box for these penguins, and nothing else is benefiting it. Having worked in Africa for many years, if you saw one animal in a dire situation, it would be the benefit to another one, and it'd be part of the cycle. And as a result, you would let it happen. But in this situation, we were just like, gosh, it just seems so unjust that they've made it to this point, and then something like this happens. And we went to bed wondering what was going to be the case in a couple of days' time when we could go back, hoping that that would be empty. And we went back in 2 days' time, and unfortunately, the situation hadn't changed. In fact, it got worse. We can see the chicks and the mothers in the gully there, and the rest of the colony up here. And there were more chicks that had been abandoned, more snowy mounds, less females, and it's inevitable what was going to happen. All the mothers were going to abandon their chicks. So we talked to each other, and we made a unanimous decision, and it was a very, very difficult one. But we thought perhaps there's a way that we could give them an option B. They've certainly got no option at the moment. If we give them an option B, it's up to them. We have no direct contact with them, and anyway, we decided that we were going to try.
The team decide to act.
We've given it a lot of thought. We've decided that we are definitely going to dig a shallow ramp that they will hopefully use.
It's very rare for the film crew to intervene, but they realise that they may be able to save at least some of these birds simply by digging a few steps in the ice.
Oh man, well look.
Oh my goodness. We were literally just about to leave, but the first birds are definitely making their way out, which is brilliant. So hopefully they'll just make their way back to the colony, and them and their chicks will have a much better chance of survival, because there's no chance that they were going to survive down there at all.
It was an incredibly special moment, as you can imagine. It was hard, and given the situation again, I would make the same decision. But the colony moved on, and they grew, and the chicks developed fantastically well. And there was one piece of the puzzle that we hadn't quite managed to get. And obviously this picture is a massive giveaway. And it was to try and film the Aurora Australis, the southern lights over the colony in real time. Not time-lapse, but real time. And for that to happen, we needed 3 ingredients. We needed clear skies. We needed either close to a full moon or a full moon itself, so that it would illuminate the colony. And we needed a very strong aurora so that it would overpower the light of the moon and still be very visible. We'd been there at this point for 9 months, and we hadn't had the situation arise. We kept on checking the space weather that you can actually check for solar flares and charged particles heading towards the Earth. And in August, we finally got a window where it might just work. And this gives you a little bit of insight into what happened.
Back in Antarctica, a break in the weather, and the crew have a brief window to film a very special event at the colony.
It's about 8 o'clock in the evening, it's dark, and we're hoping that tonight we might get an awesome show of Aurora Australis.
Yeah, this is definitely something that's been on the wish list since we were told we were coming down here, and all of a sudden it started to kick into action.
That is absolutely amazing. We're being so incredibly lucky here. Oh my god! It's rippling just like a curtain blowing in the wind. That is unbelievable! And over there there's a huge kink in it, and it looks like it's about to snap.
Surely this is one of the Earth's greatest spectacles.
Actually, gave me a lump in my throat watching that. That is still the most incredible natural spectacle I've ever witnessed in my life. And just so you know, all of that footage was actually in real time. So the movement of the Southern Lights was happening just like that, right in front of us. It turned out to be the strongest solar flare in nearly a decade that happened that night. So luck was shining down on us in a massive way. And it's an experience I'll never forget. But there was one last thing that I had to do before I left. And and I know that I'm running out of time, so I'll just skip through to it. But I finally managed to do just enough training and have just long enough window to be able to do my Antarctic marathon. And to date, I still think I might have been the first person to do an Antarctic marathon that runs to an emperor penguin colony and back, to be able to achieve that milestone. And yeah, it was a fantastic way to round off an incredible personal journey. Thank you very much indeed.
My word. Well, that was absolutely phenomenal. I brought a lump to my throat as well, and I was only hearing about it secondhand. So you really have captured some of the real excitement, fear, the emotional roller coaster that you must have been on to first for you to be out there, but then also to engage with these incredible animals, the emperor penguins, and to get to know them and get to save them. There was a wonderful comment that came in actually from Jane Cooksley, who just said how wonderful to see your rescue, so moving. So thank you for sharing that with us, Will. Now, Will, we've got probably about just over 10 minutes for questions. Okay,
Sorry,
so it's going to be quite quick fire because we've got so many brilliant questions that have come in.
Cool.
So I hope you're ready.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, right, first question comes from Juno, age 4. Hello, Will. What did you eat while you were there?
Wow. Okay. Do you know it was limited, let's say, and we were on a German research station. So bread, cheese, and bratwurst was always at the top of the menu. So yeah, we if we weren't careful, we would put on a lot of weight quite quickly. But it was good enough. Yeah.
It's not your classic marathon runner's diet, is it? Right, we've got a question from Grace Pembroke, who says, why do some penguins walk away from the colony on their own, only to die of exposure?
Oh, that's an interesting question. And I think there's a lot of question marks against that. There's even been a film about it, I believe. But I think the long and short of it is, just like humans do, the penguins get disorientated. As you can imagine, in Antarctica, there's not really any landmarks. And in poor weather, it can become almost impossible to see where you're going in a very short space of time. We experience it directly as people, and it's exactly the same for penguins. Imagine just being 50 centimeters or so off the ground, even as a chick, a developing chick. You very, very quickly lose your way, and that can be fatal if you don't have the protection of the rest of the colony.
Quite quickly. A brilliant question from Noah, age 6. How did you choose the animals for Dynasties, and which did you nearly choose but didn't?
Oh, good question. Let me think. A lot of the decision making was done before I came onto the project. One of the key ingredients for choosing the animals was animals. And actually penguins were slightly unusual in that respect, but animals that had family at the heart of their survival and their existence, so that there was interaction within a coherent group that you could follow and witness, but also that developed relatively quickly, so that over a very short window, a relatively short window of a year or two, we could see that change happen and see the trials and tribulations that they go through. I believe one of the species that they looked at but didn't go with, for whatever reason, was wolves. Right. Who knows? There might be an opportunity for that in the future.
Yeah, thank you. A question from Heather Nixon. Is there any kind of mental support provided for traumas such as that your team went through? So was there a counsellor out there with you, or any preparation that you had to undertake for what you might experience?
We all had a lot of support internally within our family, if you like, whilst we were down there. And as I mentioned previously, that was extremely important and an enormous crutch during the process itself. Friends and family could contact us. The lucky thing about modern technology is we could get good comms, if you like, with friends and family back home. So much so that Lindsay McRae, the cameraman, was able to tune in, if you like, to the birth of his firstborn son whilst we were out there, which happened after 3 months of us being there. So he came home to an 8-month-old boy. So that was his journey itself. But yes, there was a lot of support from both production back in Bristol, family, and also when we came home, a lot of support as well after that. And to be honest, we needed it. It was an undertaking, both physically and mentally.
Yeah. And did your cameraman then spend 8 months stood with his son between his legs?
Yeah, Lindsay told me actually after he got back, he was just like, mate, if this had happened before we left, I'm not sure I could have gone through with it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Amazing. Okay, a question from Hatchie, age 7. Do you have to be a scientist to go to Antarctica?
No, you don't. But the opportunities to go to Antarctica as a scientist are inherently more common. Most people that go to Antarctica for more than just a visit as a tourist, which is more and more possible these days, go down as part of the scientific community. They go down to study the continents and the life and the ecosystem that is part of it. And that really is the most common ticket. But I'm no scientist. And I have to say that being part of the NHU, the BBC, was, if you like, my ticket to going down there. You know, it wasn't a one-way bargain. I got a great opportunity to go to Antarctica, have an amazing life experience, but I had to come back with a fantastic film. So whether you go as a scientist or whether you go outside of science, in my case, media, you have to work at it and you've got to want it. And I think that was one of the key characteristics for going down to Antarctica and surviving it successfully, is wanting to go with a great deal of passion.
You must have seen that in everybody who was there, from the chefs to the mechanics to the medical staff, for sure.
Right. Yeah,
right, we've got an anonymous question, but a really interesting one. Did the penguins try and interact with you?
Yes, yeah, they did. They were, I think, as interested in us as we were in them. And we actually had to be very cautious. We had to keep our distance from them because we didn't want to interfere in their natural behavior. We were there to witness and film them completely objectively, and we wanted them to act normally. But yes, they did. They came and would have a look at us and give us a grunt and look down at us a little bit and move off again. There was definitely a couple of times where we were knelt there watching penguins in this direction, and then you would suddenly feel a presence very close to you. And when you're kneeling down, when you turn around and you look at an adult emperor penguin standing tall next to you, you're actually looking directly into his or her eyes. So it's quite intimidating.
Wow. Omar, age 9, wants to know, what was the lowest temperature you experienced while you were out there?
Good question. And an important factor to remember is there's air temperature and there's temperature influenced by wind chill. And that is the important temperature, is how much the air temperature, or what you feel the air temperature is, reduces because of wind chill. And when we went to film the storm, actually, I think the air temperature was about -38. And then with the wind chill, because of the high winds, it took it down to -62. So those were the coldest temperatures that we experienced when we were down there.
Incredible. Right, a question from Elise-Anne, and this is really going back to some of the kind of more traumatic side of what the filming that you were doing. As you aren't able to intervene usually when an animal's in mortal danger, do you find that some of the events, so perhaps other films that you've been involved in also, some of the events still haunt you?
Yes, I wouldn't say haunt necessarily. I would say have a strong place in my memory. That's for sure. Having worked abroad as a game ranger before I worked in television, I would say there was experiences then that were heart-wrenching and really dramatic. But I think as a naturalist, one of the things that you have to become accustomed to is that nature is quite brutal. And nature is quite raw, and at the end of the day, when you spend time in a natural world, you see things that shock you from what we would regard as being civilized. It's very much a human construct. So, but I think it's grounding, and it puts things in perspective when you do see those raw elements of nature. And at the end of the day, it's very special.
Yeah, thank you. So Steve Pettifer would like to know, do you think there are any penguin colonies yet to be discovered?
Oh, good question. I can't remember exactly the year that they discovered a huge addition of emperor penguin colonies to what was previously recorded. But up until that point, all the colonies had been recorded by sight. And with the advent of more detailed and higher resolution satellite imagery, they actually almost doubled the potential number of colonies in Antarctica from what was previously known by actually seeing the big stains of emperor penguin poo that had been left on the sea ice during a breeding season from satellite data, and that was very, very exciting in terms of getting a better idea of what their population is. I think they've probably got a good idea. Scientists have a good idea of populations now, but who knows?
Yeah. Thank you. Vanessa Humphrey would like to know, do you have any advice for writers who have dreams of script writing for nature series like Dynasties?
I think the way that you get into production companies such as the NHU and other production companies that really are a hub around Bristol that focus on natural history can be from a number of different perspectives and different approaches. Coming in as a script writer is a great way to start. You already have a fantastic ability to tell story, have a nose for what story is, and that is an incredibly valuable resource within our industry. I think to tell story for natural history is quite a skill in itself, because it's unpredictable, it's different to scripting for drama, for example. But the BBC NHU definitely encourages people from all elements of training to get in touch with the HR team and see how best to utilize your skill set to get into the industry. So I would say that without a shadow of a doubt, contacting the HR department at the BBC is a great way to start that ball rolling.
Yeah, and thank you. And connected to that, I guess there are some questions regarding your journey. So what's your background in terms of education? How did you get into this work? What was the journey that got you to Antarctica?
Sure. I think in brief, mine was slightly different. I went to Edinburgh University and did geography. And before I left Edinburgh, I'd made a lot of friends that were actually from Kenya. They took me out to Kenya. I went on a safari for the first time, fell in love with that whole experience, and decided that I was going to train to be a game ranger. I trained in South Africa before I left Edinburgh, and 1 year quickly turned into 7. And towards the end of my experience working as a game ranger and learning practically about the natural world, I started to look at stepping stones and how I could use that to come home, actually, because I was ready to come back to the UK. And I actually came to Wildscreen, which is an enormous wildlife film festival that happens in Bristol every other year. It's going to be happening this year, COVID permitting. And that was my window into understanding what the industry was about in the UK, meeting the people that are starting out and at the top of their game. And it was actually from coming to Wildscreen that I got my first experience, work experience at the BBC. And that was about 8 years ago, and I never looked back.
Okay, thank you very much. I fear that we really have run over time very slightly.
No problem.
We've got one last question, which brings it all the way back home. Where in Devon did you see the silver pheasant?
It was actually it was just outside of Stoke Fleming, which is just outside of Dartmouth. If it may still be there if you jump in your car and go have a look, who knows? It was pretty special. I think, Steve, actually, there was one thing that I did want to highlight that maybe I slightly missed the point of, was the question about going down to Antarctica, and I think you brought it up. The family that I was there with, the team of 12 of us that we were down in Antarctica with, were from all different aspects of life. Half of the team were scientists, but there was also a structural engineer, an electrical engineer, a chef, an IT specialist, and yes, so it highlights that science and media are not the only avenues and not the only tickets to get down to Antarctica. There are many.
Yeah. So to hatch age 7, there's many different career paths you might take to get you to Antarctica in the future.
Absolutely.
So first of all, Will, thank you so much. That was a really, really phenomenal talk. It really was great escapism for us all, much needed. Some really very, very touching moments. So thank you. Thank you to John and to the rest of the Agile Rabbit team, and to the University of Exeter for making tonight happen. Please, if you can afford to, then do make donations to Agile Rabbit. The links are on the chat and also on the Agile Rabbit website. I mentioned before, the next event is on the 11th of September, and that's with none other than Noam Chomsky, who's joining us, which will be phenomenal. This and other future events are all available on agilerabbit.com, and so do go back and have a look at the podcast of the past events. A recording of this event is going to be available on the website and on YouTube soon. So for any of you who didn't catch it all, or you'd like to send it on to your friends, please do direct them to that. But just in closing, Will, thank you so much for this evening. It's been a wonderful experience for us all. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. Thanks very much, John, for inviting me to speak, and thank you very much, Steve, for being an incredible host. Thank you very much indeed.